And I share my screen. So, thanks everyone for joining. This is our Heathrow Airport expansion assembly. We're going to do the presentation. As I say, it should last about 25 minutes if I can keep myself going through it at a good pace. And then hopefully we'll get plenty of time for discussion in breakout rooms afterwards. So I just want to start by giving a little bit of an introduction to Safe Landing. Um, our kind of core crew of the organization is made up of, we've got pilots, I'm an engineer. In our community, we're a global community of aviation workers, students, and enthusiasts that care about our industry and our planet. So anyone anywhere in the world connected to aviation with a love for flying, but also a love for the environment and our planet is welcome to join our community and contribute to our output. Our vision as an organization is we want to live in a world where aviation can flourish in harmony with nature and the beauty of flying can be enjoyed by all for generations to come. So we really love flying, but we want to be able to do it in the future, and we want, our children and future generations to be able to enjoy the same privileges we do today. We do have, after this event, next week and in the future, we've got a couple of community events coming up, and I can just let Todd give a little shout out to those.
Thanks, Finlay. Yeah, we've got the community check-in, which is every 2 months. So this month, we ideally do it on the last Thursday of the month, and it is on the last Thursday of this month. That's the 27th of August. It's a very informal space for us to hear from one another, see what we're all up to, and keep that online community from wherever we are in the world. And then our second event, in-person event, is in September 27th. It's a Sunday. We did this before. It was a great success at Waterloo Action Centre. You can see the picture on screen there. And yeah, we're hoping to do it again. So if you know anyone, I think a few of you on the call were there actually. So if you know anyone that might be interested and find it helpful, then please do invite them. And yeah, we look forward to hosting the next Climate Fresk. We're also going to do a welcome aboard call next month, which instead of a community check-in, we're going to have a space specifically for people that may never have reached out to us or joined one of the online calls just to make it extra friendly. So that's enough from me. Back to you, Finn.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I can see Luke and Joel in there at least, so good to see some faces from that on this call.
Katie.
So, going to start with the background to Heathrow. You already know what Heathrow Airport is. I'm sure it's the largest airport in the UK, and one of the largest in the world. So yeah, it's one of the largest airports globally. Um, Last year, almost 85 million passengers passed through Heathrow. That's like about 230,000 passengers per day. The airport serves over 200 destinations and it claims to be the most connected airport in the world. So it's a pretty massive bit of aviation infrastructure. And a lot of cargo passes through Heathrow as well, 1.6 million tons, and apparently 290 billion in trade. And apparently that's a quarter of all UK trade by value. Although it's worth noting, quite a lot of that is gold, apparently, through the banking sector. Um, and it's because fundamentally, if you are going to do air freight, you tend to do it with high value goods for a variety of reasons. So it's a significant bit of national infrastructure and it is significant to the economy. And just like to compare it to the other largest airports in the world, it currently ranks seventh. But you can see actually basically like number four is 85 million as well. So it's basically equal fourth largest airport in the world. Pretty significant. Now, Heathrow has been wanting to expand for a while. Its latest expansion plan is to build a third runway to the northwest that you can see in this diagram. So it currently has two runways and it wants to build a third. That third runway involves, you can see it here, this is the M25 motorway that runs around London. It's going to go over that motorway and they will need to divert the motorway and build a tunnel underneath it. Um, and Heathrow estimates this is going to cost about 50 billion. They do have a range from 40 to 60 billion. But that number has increased with time, and I would say it's quite likely to increase again. And it doesn't include everything. So there's potentially large additional costs associated with it that likely the government would have to pay for that could cost, 10 to 20 billion. So we are looking at total probably over 70 billion. That's without further inflation cost rises. And if you know about the High Speed 2 project, similar comparable scale project in the UK recently, that went massively over time and over budget. And I think it's always wise to think these costs are going to go up, not down. Um, it also involves demolishing hundreds of homes. So in that area where the North Runway is, there's currently basically a kind of village, hundreds of homes that will need to be demolished, and those people need to move elsewhere, which has a human impact as well as an impact in terms of needing to build more homes. Um, and the government's trying to do that at the moment in the UK. There is quite a bit of history to Heathrow expansion. It has been debated since more than 25 years ago. It was approved by the Labour government in 2009 and then cancelled by Conservatives in 2010. It was recommended again in 2015 and then approved in 2018. But then there was a bunch of legal challenges. There was campaigners that argued it was not compatible with our new climate targets, and that was initially successful. It was also delayed by the COVID pandemic in the early 2020s. But last year, the plans have been revived. There's a new Labour government. The legal challenge was overturned, and there's now this apparent ambition to try and open it by the middle of the 2030s. It is interesting to note that, it's taken more than 20 years to get to this point already, and it's still in the planning process. So that shows that 2035 target is likely very optimistic. If you look at likely ranges, it probably will be towards the end of the 2030s at best, and maybe the early 2040s even could be likely. So 2035 would be the absolute quickest if they went all out and if a lot of planning things were changed to fast track it. Now, as part of this, the government recognises it needs to update its planning policy around airport expansion because it's out of date and it came before a bunch of other laws were changed. So there's this thing. So the current government have said this is critical to national economic growth, and they've launched this Heathrow expansion national policy statement, um, and they're consulting on it. And that closes on the 1st of September, which is in a couple of weeks. So we've been drafting a response to it, and some of the ideas that we're putting in, I'm going to share with you today. We're planning to submit a response, and we're really keen to share our proposals with you, get your feedback and your input to help improve what we put in and make sure it is truly the voice of our community. Most importantly, we want to discuss it. We would just want to encourage debate, both in this Zoom call, but also just in the wider public media political debate, and add in a different narrative that's not out there at the moment. So the UK government, currently it's a Labour government, they have this historic four tests that they've always had as a Labour Party policy for the past 8 years, maybe, since Jeremy Corbyn was around, and it was a bit of a fudge. It basically says we've got these four tests for major airport expansion, and any proposal must deliver nationwide economic growth, comply with legal air quality obligations, minimize local noise impacts, and align fully with the UK's climate change and net zero targets. Um, Now, those are those sound quite specific, but they are not quantified. And all of those things, you could kind of make a subjective judgment on. So something we've done collectively with other NGOs is to write to the government back in early June. We knew this was coming up, and we said, created a briefing, and we said, why don't you quantify those tests? And then we can judge whether Heathrow can meet it using evidence and using numbers rather than kind of a vague unqualified thing. So you can find that there, but some of what I'm going to present to you is based off of that. The other thing I'll say is I'm going to focus this talk on climate and on the economy because that matters to workers. There's a lot that could be said about air quality and noise, but that probably just needs to be a separate thing. Um, So I'm going to focus on economy and climate. So I just want to start out by kind of laying out what our concerns are here. The main thing is the carbon budgets. So when it comes to what they said was the UK's legally binding climate commitments, what we have is carbon budgets. These run in 5-year periods and they're projected into the future. So we already know, like in a decade's time, what our carbon budget can be. Um, Now, the problem is we have been reducing our emissions in the UK, but we've kind of done the easy stuff already. A lot of our electricity grid and polluting industries have been outsourced. There's maybe less steel manufacturing here, but there's more elsewhere. The hard stuff is now needed and it's a lot more tricky. Road transport, home and buildings, agriculture, aviation, shipping, heavy industries, and all of these are looking difficult to achieve. Um, yeah. And it's just worth noting, like in the future, when Heathrow needs to open, in that period, they need to halve emissions. And then again for carbon budget 7, which is in about 2040, emissions need to be halved again. So they need to be really tiny compared to what they are now. Um, if you look at the projections from the Climate Change Committee, this is a projection of like economy-wide emissions, different colors, different sectors. Um, and basically we're banking on this purple line is really big at the moment. It's road transport. We're banking on a massive rapid reduction in road transport. The red is buildings, so that as well. But to do that, we need to electrify road transport, and we're not doing that as fast as we should do. Similarly, we're not insulating our homes and installing heat pumps to get buildings down. But you can see that if everything goes as planned, most optimistically, what's going to happen around the time that Heathrow opens is that aviation will be one of the largest emitting sectors in the UK. Aviation's the purple line here, and green is agriculture. So those two sectors are going to be the biggest by quite a long way in the UK, and there's going to be a lot of focus on that by the time that Heathrow opens up. So these other sectors have clear decarbonisation options, whether it's energy, road transport, and buildings. We know what we need to do. It's renewables, it's electric cars, it's heat pumps and insulation. Aviation has got far fewer options, particularly for long-haul air travel, like Heathrow is. So small aircraft, regional aircraft can go electric, perhaps, but long haul really doesn't have any options apart from jet fuel. Now, and the options it does have in terms of technologies and fuels are going to be very difficult to rapidly and sustainably scale up. Our community is particularly skeptical of sustainable aviation fuels and carbon removals, which is what you'd need for these long haul flights. We do have positions on both of those, so I won't go into that in detail here, but you can obviously read those and you can let us know your thoughts. We're also lacking effective policies to control aviation emissions, both the CO2 and the non-CO2. Um, the policies that do exist, there's the UK emissions trading system, which is a cap and trade scheme, but it only applies to flights within Europe. The Corsia scheme applies to everything else, international flights beyond Europe, but the majority of emissions from in the UK and certainly from Heathrow come from there. Now, that scheme is far too weak to control emissions. It doesn't price carbon much at all, and it has no measure to cap and reduce emissions. So we don't have a way of controlling emissions. And that is a major issue because the government actually like doesn't have a policy instrument that where it can turn emissions down if it feels like it needs to at the moment. This is a major risk that we point out and a reason we think this needs to be reformed before we can consider long haul massive international airport expansion. So if we just play out a hypothetical situation here, what are we concerned with? So we're worried Heathrow gets, let's just say Heathrow gets the green light to expand and build a third runway. That kind of seems great for aviation and for jobs, right? We're going to get building, we're going to get flying. The runway will open though somewhere between 2035, 2040 probably. Climate crisis will have inevitably worsened by that point. There will be a lot more focus on the climate and climate policies. Other sectors of the UK economy very likely will have failed to decarbonise as rapidly as hoped, and that will give even less wiggle room for aviation. The UK will then struggle to meet its carbon budgets, which are legally binding, and just, a big risk to our health and everyone else's. Aviation will have become the largest emitting UK sector. All of the focus becomes on us. Stricter regulations are applied, and then Heathrow is unable to operate at its new capacity like it's planned. That means it's unable to achieve its return on investment. They've sunk 50 billion into this. They need this airport operating at maximum capacity to try and make that money back over multiple years. And as such, we're going to not get the economic benefits that we might think we're going to get, and we may well then lose jobs as a result of that company trying to seek back some of its profits. So this is why it's a direct concern to workers, and the kind of very just evidence-based way that we're seeing this play out. Um, this is a very likely scenario. In this likely scenario, if you just think about this from the airport point of view and their investors, they'll lose tens of billions in investment. They might need to be bailed out by taxpayers, so it'll affect everybody. They might also sue the UK government, if the UK government imposes a strict carbon budget on them that they didn't impose up front. Um, these very wealthy companies, the pension funds that own Heathrow, may well come for the UK government. Aviation workers will lose their jobs. UK government has wasted 15 years. It's diverted scarce skills, skilled workers in construction and engineering away from other stuff like building homes and building renewable energy and insulating homes and installing heat pumps. They might end up having to subsidize a lot more sustainable aviation fuel to try and bring emissions down. That will be hugely expensive, will be a big economic drain, and it could create economic costs rather than growth. This might happen anyway, because even if it opens and it was allowed to operate regardless of climate, the UK has an outbound tourism deficit where actually more money leaves our economy via flights than comes in. Airline industry, wider airline industry will be affected by this because they're probably going to have to pay increased landing charges to land at Heathrow to try and make that money back. And wider society will probably have to pay more tax. Flying will become more expensive and we'll lose out on alternative options we could have gone down. So, our proposals, firstly on carbon, is to create a UK aviation carbon budget. So, we have a economy-wide carbon budget, but we need a specific one for aviation that is a fraction of the overall UK carbon budget. So, if you imagine, this is like the carbon budget for the whole economy with time. Red is aviation there, and it becomes a bigger fraction as other sectors decarbonize. What we should do is we should create an aviation budget from that, and then that will be every year as well. And then you have airport specific carbon budgets that are consistent with that. So then you have these sub budgets. So at the moment, Heathrow has about half of emissions, and let's just say it would have half of the budget, but its share will need to decrease, and so will the other airports. This is actually really easy to monitor and control because 1 kilogram of jet fuel is 3.12 kilograms of CO2. So you just measure and monitor the sale of jet fuel and you control that, and you can limit the sale of jet fuel if the carbon budget isn't being met. Heathrow could then only expand if it accepts that condition up front. This prevents the risk of, being sued, the government being sued in the future. And it would create a greater market incentive for Heathrow and other airports and airlines to scale up low carbon fuels and tech, which will create jobs and will secure the future of the industry. If they aren't confident of scaling up that low carbon tech and fuels, then they won't expand. And we should decide that up front rather than kind of hoping for something in the future. Now, it's not just carbon that is important. There's also non-carbon emissions. So contrails as well. I'm assuming that most of you know about contrails, but their impact, the non-CO2 warming impact of aviation is as high, if not higher, than the impact caused by just CO2. Most of the non-CO2 warming is caused by contrails, the white clouds that form behind aircraft. Um, and most of those contrails occur over North America and Europe, like you can see from this heat map here, where obviously Heathrow is kind of right in the center of there. Warming contrails predominantly occur. They only occur on sort of less than 5% of flights. Generally, it's in the northern latitudes where it's cold and wet. That's why you can see it in the global north there. During winter time, where it's cold and wet, during nighttime, because that's when they trap heat, but also at higher altitudes because it's colder and wetter up there. And that tends to be longer range aircraft. So this is why Heathrow flights are very likely to generate some of those significant warming contrails, and that should be a consideration in assessing the expansion's project's impact. Now, that's not at the moment, it's never been considered in airport expansions. But yeah, we think that basically large long haul airport expansions, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, like Heathrow, should only be able to expand if we as an industry can demonstrate that non CO2 impacts, contrails, but also others, are being quantified and can be effectively mitigated. That will create a positive commercial incentive for us to actively go and try and mitigate contrails, and that will create aviation worker jobs. There is also air pollution to think about. There's things we can do immediately in airports that we're not doing to reduce air pollution. We can also use cleaner hydro-treated fossil jet fuel, um, which is another topic we can go into. We've got a position pack on that, but again, it's something that airports don't do today and they could do. Night NOx is also important. We think there should be higher landing charges for NOx and noise, and those landing charges should increase with time. And again, that's something that we could spell out before the airport expansion happens. So, final thing is on economy. So, obviously, like the government at the moment is very desperate for economic growth. And it's one thing for us to just say, you know what, this current plan is flawed, but we kind of need to give them something else that they can sell to voters, sell to the industry, and ultimately try and progress our economy. So, what is that positive proposal? We propose a focus instead on zero emissions flights. These will be much shorter flights. They won't be relevant for Heathrow, they'll be relevant elsewhere. But we think we could develop a lot of jobs, technology, and skills in the UK working on it. So, if we put in place carbon budgets and carbon pricing, that will generate revenue, which we can then use for this industry. We're in favor of higher pricing for private jets and for luxury long haul. Again, that will limit the expansion plans of airports like Heathrow, but it will generate a clear market for low carbon flight technologies. We're keen that the UK also directs some of its innovation fund away from sustainable aviation fuel to this area. We think that some funding should be ring-fenced for startups as well as the large incumbent aerospace manufacturers like Airbus, Boeing, Rolls-Royce. And we want an industrial strategy that supports the skills and the supply chain there. Um, we think that we should focus on some pioneer airports first, and Heathrow isn't well suited to that. So financial support's provided to specific airports, but a focus on smaller, underutilized regional airports rather than large airports like Heathrow. Um, so there's a number of benefits here. It's quicker. We've got these airports already. We don't need to expand runways. It's cheaper. It's not going to cost 50 billion. It's going to cost a few billion. Much lower risk because it can take place within carbon budgets. Much lower carbon. It's lower community noise, better air quality because this doesn't produce air pollution, and it supports innovation and knock-on benefits to the rest of the economy. The UK is really well suited. It's got island geography, it's got flights to Ireland, Western Europe, and it's got the aerospace expertise and the electric motor expertise to lead this industry. So, yeah, we're really keen on developing them, creating high value jobs, positioning the UK as a global leader, and also attracting new tourists here that will fly in a low carbon way. We think this could create much more jobs far faster and be a much more agile strategy than trying to go the Heathrow route. Final proposal to satisfy George as well, who's our worker participation lead. We do think that the UK Jet Zero aviation strategy should be updated. We're really keen that when that's done, it is done with using workers' assemblies, listening to the voice and the expertise of workers that actually work in the industry. This would work much like citizens' assemblies, but rather than citizens from across the country, we use workers specifically in the industry, and we have a representative spread of workers in different roles in different parts of the industry. I won't go into that more, but you can learn more about that on our website as well. So, thanks for listening. That was a quick run through. I will share this pack afterwards, and it does also have links to various other positions that all feed into this. Um, but yeah, I've managed to keep to half an hour. So I'm quite happy about that. Do you want to stop recording, Todd?